Hey guys, so we're trying something a little bit different today. My first video since I started focusing on gaming content was a history of Puyo Puyo video. In it I go through the beginning and I briefly discuss the Madou Monogatari series, the RPG series that spun off into the Puyo Puyo series. The series has basically no presence outside Japan, so documentation is very poor, but basically this is a series of dungeon crawler RPGs that star the characters that would later go on to star also in the Puyo Puyo games. The first game released for MSX computers back in 1990. And a number of entries came out over the years until Compile went bankrupt in 2003. SEGA at this point owned the Puyo Puyo IP and the characters, but the original series was acquired by D4 Enterprise. A successor company to Compile, Compile Hard, was released in 2005 and is best known for the Hyperdimension Neptunia and the Record of Arius War series. Under license from D4, Compile Hard released a new Madou Monogatari game called Madou Monogatari in 2013 for the PlayStation Vita, known in the West as Sorcery Saga: Curse of the Great Curry God. Last October, Compile Hard announced that they'll be publishing a new Madou game that will be developed by Sting, who have ties to the original Compile. At the time of writing, the game is scheduled to be released this summer on PS5, PS4 and Nintendo Switch, in Japan at least. As part of an agreement with SEGA, the game will feature the original cast. To be honest, I'm not optimistic that the game will get a localization. There is not a lot of discussion of the series online, so I've decided to review the first game in the original trilogy the only way a lowly English speaker like me can. I'm going to be reviewing Madou Monogatari I, the Mega Drive remake of the first game. This was released in 1996 and was actually the last Mega Drive game to be released in Japan. Just to be clear, the Madou Monogatari series was released as a trilogy of episodes on the MSX. I couldn't find a lot of information about the development of the games online, but Kazunari Yotsumitsu of Compile did reminisce on their experiences developing the compilation series on their blog back in 2009. In a nutshell, he said that he and his colleagues wanted to create a comedic RPG, whereas other RPGs would have taken inspiration from mythology and fantasy. Compile took inspiration from pretty much anything. The Bayon spell was inspired by Bayon Rock, a track by Japanese metal group Kinyoku Shino Tai. The idea to name the trilogy Madou Monogatari 1, 2, 3 was inspired by the spreadsheet software Lotus 123. One thing of note is that there isn't a defined timeline for the series, with some manuals, books and promotional materials across Madou Monogatari and Puyo Puyo not ruling out the possibility of multiple dimensions being involved. This was actually a motivator for Kenji Ota, who, after leaving Compile in the 90s, began defining his own lore by writing the Shin Madou Monogatari series of novels. While Compile are best known for the Puyo Puyo series, which was derived from Madou Monogatari, they started releasing games in the early 1980s on the MSX. Some of these include the puzzle platformer Championship Loadrunner, a pool game called Lunar Pool, and the Master System and Mega Drive versions of the Ghostbusters video game. Compile's main genre during their early years was actually shoot-'em-ups. For their first few years of existence in the 80s, they were known as Programmers 3, with the shooters they developed including Zanak, Aleste, as well as its sequel, and Gunhead. Okay, my fucking ears. So I'm just going to go through the story of the game really quick. It's a very simple one. The magic test at Magic Kindergarten is held once per year, and Arl is not confident in the exam, so she just throws her pencil and uses that to decide her answers to the exam. She got lucky and she was the only one that passed the written exam and is now sent into the dungeon to perform various tests and if she can escape the dungeon after doing these tests, she will pass the exam. Okay, so I started the game and I have to admit, I'm really not the best when it comes to these first-person dungeon crawlers, so it took me a good bit of time to get my bearings and to figure out how I should progress. So in a nutshell, you can rush to the top floor if you'd like, but if you don't do the problems, you'll get a bad ending. At the end of the game, you get a score out of 100 based on how many problems you complete, as well as a number of other factors. If you get a score below 90, that counts as a fail in the Madou exam, which is a bad ending. So I'm going to at least make an honest attempt here at clearing as many of the problems as possible. So let's get into what makes the Mega Drive version of this game unique. While the game is obviously remade in 16-bit graphics, an improvement over the MSX and Game Gear versions, the most interesting thing is that the game does away with any numerical measurement of your stats like health or magic. When you're in battles, when you use recovery items and so on, you're given a rough idea as to how Arl is doing. She'll say that she has full health, about half health, and so on. The same thing goes for magic. The battle system is also very unique. If I had to compare it to something, I would say it's a bit like a fighting game. So spells are performed by holding down the A button, pressing a series of directions on the D-pad in sequence, then letting go of the A button. The enemy will also attack every few seconds, and there are a few things you can do to mitigate against damage, such as jumping or blocking. At the end of the day, this is a relatively simple and short game. I've seen long plays that get through the game in about 2.5 hours, but it did take me a good bit longer than that, to be honest. Again, I'm not the most experienced with first-person dungeon crawlers, so you'll have to bear with me. Along the way, Arl meets Camus, her guide through the test. Camus will occasionally turn up and give Arl tips as she progresses through the dungeon. Meanwhile, Lara, who is kind of Arl's rival, is chasing after Camus. So basically, you're climbing up the tower and solving problems as you go. The problems could be anything. They could involve putting an item into a hole, performing a spell, following the door to the right, and even weird things like turning around or just banging your head against the wall twice. So I had an easy enough time with the game overall, except for the final boss, but I'll get back to that. But you unlock a number of spells during the game which give Arl new abilities, and many of these have applications both inside and outside a battle. Some of the spells include Fire, which shoots fire at the enemy, Ice Storm, which shoots ice at the enemy, Healing recovers some health both inside and outside battle, Diacute makes Arl's next spell more powerful, Warp you can use in the first person dungeon view, which will warp you directly one floor above where you currently are on the map, and you can also use this in battle, and I'll discuss that in a minute. Ria Panko, which triggers a random event such as a Fat Man Spirit dropping coins on Arl. I was actually kind of afraid of using this one, to be honest. You can get a good bit of cash, of course, but you can also get royally fucked by this skill, so with that in mind, I barely used it. I found that I didn't really have a use for some of the skills, and I actually forgot about a few of them until I looked them up while writing the script. This is unfortunate because with some of the spells you can actually do some pretty fun stuff to enemies in combat. For example, Warp is mainly used to teleport one floor above you while in first person view, as I already mentioned, but using it in battle will cause a black hole to open and the enemy to be sucked into the cold vacuum of space. This is funny, of course, but what I actually noticed is that you don't get any XP for doing this, so maybe it's best to avoid doing it at all. So the final boss is Mamono, a recurring character who was also the final boss in the MSX version of this game. He was replaced in a few different versions, but he's also the final boss in this version. Mamono can change form, but in real form, he is this bird-type creature. I had a good bit of difficulty, to be honest, and I actually edited some of the video up to now while I was taking a break because I had some difficulty, I'm not gonna lie, but What I realised was then I hadn't got all of the legendary treasures. There are 3 legendary accessories. There is the power brooch, speed earrings, and the magical makeup. It was actually the magical makeup I was missing. So I went back and did some grinding and managed to defeat the boss eventually. And then after that, you meet the Dark Prince or Satan for one last kind of extra battle. But Satan kind of gives up and vows to meet Arl again at a later date. And then the magic tower nearly explodes and you have to get out on time. And then, so that is the end of the exam. And this is the point where you find out whether or not you passed the exam. And unfortunately, in my case, I didn't. I got 86 points, which wasn't enough to pass. I got close, but unfortunately, I didn't get to pass this time around. Would have liked to, but this kind of took longer than I expected. And it's also for a reason. I considered kind of comparing this version to other versions, but recording this kind of took longer than I expected. So maybe that's something to revisit at a later date. I especially want to play the PC Engine CD version because of that melting face scene. But again, that might be something to come back to at another date. And yeah, that was the end of the game. So to finish off, I thought it'd be interesting to discuss where the Madou Monogatari series went from here. The Mega Drive version of this game was actually the last Mega Drive game to be released in Japan, being released on March 22nd, 1996. According to the Japanese version of Wikipedia, there were rumours of the game being cancelled, but Compile came out with an update telling fans that the game wouldn't be cancelled. That development was simply taking longer than expected. There were actually a number of Madou Monogatari games after this, released quickly over the next few years. Chaotic Final Exam was released for Windows 95 in November 1996 as part of Disk Station Volume 12. This game covers Arl's final magic exam. Madou Monogatari I Flame Graduate was the PC Engine version of the first chapter, the events of which are also covered in this Mega Drive version. Wizard's Tower was released in September 1997 for Windows 95 and starred Shezo, everyone's favourite perverted mage.
Finally, I've got you all to myself.
I can't believe you came.
I told you I'd come for you.
Secret of Elysium was released exclusively in Korea in Volume 5 of the Korean version of Disk Station. The final game was simply called Madou Monogatari and was released for the Sega Saturn in July 1988, just a few months before the Dreamcast released in Japan. According to Takeshi Okamoto, the game ran into development issues and was almost cancelled, but it was thanks to financial help from Sega that they managed to complete the game. According to Puyo Nexus, Sega actually bought the rights to Puyo Puyo and its characters in 1998, but gave Compile the freedom to continue developing and releasing their games as they were already doing. A funny side effect of this is that Sega are credited in the copyright information for all the games Compile released during this time, like Puyo Puyo for example, even on competing platforms. I just think there's something very funny, for example, of seeing Sega mentioned in an official Game Boy Color game. As I mentioned in my original Puyo Puyo video, Sonic Team would take over development duties after Compile went bankrupt. So what happened to Compile? There aren't a lot of sources for this, so I'm going off of Puyo Nexus for a lot of it, but it looks like a classic case of a business expanding too quickly. Compile opened a Korean branch, released business collaboration software called Power Acti, and moved into a bigger office space. There were a few problems, however. Power Acti was a commercial flop, despite a large amount of money spent on marketing. Puyo Puyo was their only game franchise that consistently sold well. And on helping matters was the delays that a lot of their games like Wako Wako Puyo Puyo Dungeon were experiencing. According to Compile founder Matsumitsu Nitani, also known as Mu, the plan was to buy back the Puyo Puyo rights they sold to Sega once their financial situation improved, but this never happened. Actually, a fun fact is that the guy actually has a YouTube channel these days with a variety of gaming-related videos. When Compile went bankrupt, their legacy would be carried on by a number of companies. Compile Heart is a subsidiary of Idea Factory, founded in 2006 by Nitani until he retired in 2012. As I mentioned, Sega bought the rights to Puyo Puyo and seemingly its cast as well, with the rights to other franchises such as Madou Monogatari going to D4 Enterprise. As I mentioned in my last Puyo Puyo video, Compile Heart are perhaps best known for the Hyperdimension Neptunia series and the Record of Arius War series, but they've also developed a lot of games really. Under license from D4, they developed a new Madou Monogatari game for the PlayStation Vita called C Madou Monogatari in Japan, and Sorcery Saga Curse of the Great Curry God in the West, released in 2013. Matsumitsu Nitani came out of retirement for a little while in 2016 and released Noki Nyoki Tabadachi Hen on the Nintendo 3DS eShop in Japan, published by D4 Enterprise. The game is a successor to Pyoki and Ya, a Neo Geo arcade game that Compile started development on, with development completed by Aki after Compile's bankruptcy and released in 2003. Nitani planned to raise funds for a Nintendo Switch version via a crowdfunding campaign, but nothing ever came of this. So yeah, that's pretty much where we're at now. Today, Compile's legacy is being kept alive via Sega's Puyo games and by Compile Heart and their associated developers. As I mentioned earlier, Compile Heart and Sting are planning to release a new Madou Monogatari game sometime this year in Japan, but given how long it took for the Puyo games to consistently get localized, I'm not holding my breath for a Western release of this new game, to be honest, but we'll see what happens. So yeah, that brings us to the end, I think. It was interesting to look back at an obscure game like this and to try and find details behind its development. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of information available in English, but that's to be expected for a game that only released in Japan. I can't help but wonder what the experience was like for employees when the company was struggling. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video, so thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.